So it really is my great honor now to introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Janet Woodcock is currently the Director for the Center of Drug Evaluation and Research at the FDA. She's been at the FDA for over 30 years. She originally did her MD from Northwestern University, held teaching posts at Penn State and at UCSF. But the real reason why I am truly delighted that you're going to be speaking, Dr. Woodcock, is that you've just been such a great supporter of the Kidney Health Initiative right from its inception. And I still remember in 2013, early 2013, I think, we were all in a relatively small room at the FDA. There were maybe 12 people, and we sketched out to you what we wanted to do. And you were supportive then, and you've been extremely supportive since. So it really is my true honor and privilege to invite you to give our keynote address on FDA perspectives for the Kidney Health Initiative. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's been my privilege to be a part of this, although I'm strictly in the funding end is my part of it. But I'd like to thank all the organizers for inviting me. You know, this is a really fantastic time to focus on patients at the center. I was really interested to hear about 1969, or 69 that was, yeah. That's a great story because there have been multiple episodes during the last, say, 50 years where patients have really made a difference. Think about the HIV epidemic and how the people, the activists really changed everything. But now I think is a time when everyone is realizing really the importance of not just thinking about the patient, but actually having the people with chronic diseases at the table to engage in the deliberations. And it's not just a recognition of who this work is for, all this research and work that goes on. It's also a recognition that people with chronic diseases are experts in the disease. They bring a perspective and understanding that other people do not have, okay? They haven't lived with the disease, or they're caregivers who live with loved ones with the disease. So I think FDA has been doing a great deal on patient-focused drug development and trying to model activities that can bring patients to the table, but this initiative's been going on for a while and is really a great example. Now, this is a time of really significant biomedical innovation, and of course you hear about it, and I saw the quote, and many people, I've been at many disease meetings recently where they say, how come not us, right? And I think kidney health is one of those areas that has not moved as fast as other areas. But even with innovation and even with all the research that's done, it still takes decades of time after discovery of, say, a mechanism of what causes the problem, or a target that's discovered in an academic lab, to get to where treatment is approved. Maybe 2 decades, maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years. This is way too long. And as has been already said, the patients really can't wait that long. They have needs today. And even after treatments get on the market, as you know, or new devices or whatever, dissemination and uptake of best practices may take years in the community. And so there's really a lot of work to be done, and there's work that groups coming together across academia, patients, researchers, developers can make a difference where one sector alone cannot make that difference. And so that's what I'd like to talk about, because our challenge collectively is to narrow those time gaps, to make sure that when after discovery occurs, that you can move that discovery along and you can really translate it quickly, and then it can be disseminated effectively so nobody is out there not getting the best standard of care possible. And there are efforts that consortia like this can make at each stage. I actually know a consortium that's primarily a very rare disease, and the founder of that consortium is an academic doc who was unlucky enough to get that disease and nearly die from it several times. And his reaction was to organize all the academic researchers around the world and make sure they were totally focused on trying to advance treatments for that disease. And he's made a huge difference in this consortium. So even at the academic discovery stage, you know, patient groups have, typically advocacy groups have focused on funding biomedical research. But there is some benefit to focusing collective efforts in academic research that are moving toward a goal. But more often, consortia like this are coming together around development, a clearer path to the market for drugs, better tools, better ways of disseminating the results. So I'll talk about that a little bit. But we understand that each stage of this long 30-year pathway or 20-year pathway is going to have to be improved, right? Significantly if we're going to change the dial on any disease. So what happens with translation of an innovation and the path to market? What can be done? Well, I think, as I said, consortia are very effective. And part of the reason is because there are these huge gaps between each stage. There's big gaps between academia. And I loved what you said. You know, everybody needs to come to the table and be recognized. And you can't say, well, I'm like an academic, I'm like pure, and I don't do anything, and then industry's over here, and they're bad guys, or no, the academia is clueless, and the patients don't know anything. You can't do that. You have to come together, respect each other, and take from each really where their expertise lies. And we need patients at the table to do that. What patients bring and their families bring is that sense of urgency and that sense of direction and that sense of focus and commitment. Now, people don't go into academic medicine to not make a difference in the world. They really want to. And people don't go into industry to not make a difference in the world. That's, you know, part of the attraction, right? And so forth. People probably don't go into politics. I don't have much experience with this, but to not make a difference in the world, right? But they need input from others. Otherwise, you're just stuck in your own channel. So consortia like this can impact in many ways, and I'll talk about this a little bit. First of all, one of the basic things that isn't collected often and we don't know, and this isn't for sort of common, say, kidney diseases, but the many, many, many pathways of rare kidney diseases, we don't actually know what's called the natural history. And so what industry typically does is when they're going to think about doing a treatment, they think, well, you know, we don't know much about this disease. So we'll get a couple academic researchers together and they say, well, in my experience, you know, the people progress this fast or whatever, right? And they're usually wrong, right, because they've only seen a small sample. And these diseases are often very heterogeneous. So a lot of groups have been getting together, collecting information from the patients called natural history information. And the National Organization for Rare Diseases, we gave them a grant a number of years ago, and they raised some matching money, and they have an electronic registry system that any rare disease group can pick up and adapt to their own purpose and collect from the patients. Even their medical records can be loaded into there so that we begin to get, for rare diseases, we get an idea of what's happening to people. That's critical for industrial sponsors, for drug developers or device developers, because you have to be able to foresee what's going to happen to the people to try to devise a treatment. Endpoints and outcome measures, and I know this group has worked on this already in some diseases. Often because we don't understand how different outcomes correlate with ultimate outcomes and so forth, and how you do a trade-off between benefit and risk if you're just using some lab test as the benefit. There's a lot of work that can be done in working up outcome measures that can be used to measure the effect of an intervention in a clinical trial. And without these, again, there's no clear pathway to market. So you wonder, why is everybody flocking into cancer? Well, one reason, of course, is the war on cancer started in the 70s, right? And there's been like 50 years almost of biomedical research focused on that. But even then, it wouldn't be that simple, except they do have outcome measures like tumor response and things that are kind of immediate feedback, okay? You treat 20 people with a cancer, and if the cancer doesn't shrink, you think, well, I better try something. I better not work on this anymore, right? So they have simple, straightforward measures they can use that give them a lot of feedback early on the potential success of the treatment. Patient-reported outcomes. One of the things, in cancer, this is a very sore point, I can tell you, with the patients. They're tolerating this gigantic load of toxicity, but we don't have good ways to collect, okay, what patients are really putting up with, and we don't really know that well. But patient-reported outcomes can be used to approve drugs, for example, if they're collected properly, and the FDA has a lot of guidance on that. So that's another thing, from a patient point of view, what is important? What is a burden of disease? What things should be measured? Often, and we've been having these patient-focused drug development meetings, and what we've learned is what the doctors think is important is not what the patients think is important about their disease. So we may have outcome measures that the patients feel are not as critical, right, as what actually matters to the people who have the disease and will be taking these therapies. So you can work on that in many different ways. And there have been multiple disease groups who have been working on both patient-reported outcomes that are better for their disease, as well as endpoints in different diseases. Then clinical trials. Here's another thing. What is a pathway? Well, one thing patients can tell anybody and develop is what is the acceptability of the trial design? Often trials are designed in ways that patients won't stay in the trial. There's too many procedures. It's too often they would have children and they might have to stay in the hospital a whole day and have all these tests. Well, what parent is going to put up with that again and again and again for multiple visits? So then what we get is we get dropouts, and we have all these huge dropouts, and then we say we can't. FDA, you know, we're the big villains here. We say we don't know what to do with these data. We have mostly missing data in this trial, and maybe all that effort is wasted because the trial wasn't acceptable to the patients. Recruitment, using cohorts you've identify people who are interested in participating in a clinical trial, because often recruitment takes a very long time, and that slows, again, it's one of these gaps, it's one of these things that slows down the pace. The Alzheimer's community, I know they've had multiple failures in Alzheimer's disease, but both in Europe and here in the United States, they're developing cohorts of people, so that if something comes along, they'll be ready, and they can quickly test it, right, and enroll those people. So that's something that can be done. In the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, even though that's a rare disease, you know, they got the new treatments that they had. They enrolled those trials like lightning. They had the people genotyped and ready to go, okay? And so they got those people enrolled in those trials, and they got those trials finished so that, you know, they could get that therapy evaluated. So that's another thing. And we even have in cancer now, we have patient participation in trials, master protocols that test multiple different products where the patients participate in the selection of the agents that go into those trials. And I think we're going to see more of that. So the involvement of the community in many ways can enhance and speed up the translation phase of this. Now, I was asked to talk about real-world evidence. So what about real-world evidence? Well, you know, it provides really new opportunities to have data. Like the registries I was talking about is one type of that, okay? But there are many other types. So the virtual registries, I think that we really would like to see more of, especially in rare diseases. The natural history can tell us about trial design, how many people have this. We can look in the records. FDA has the Sentinel network. We have millions of people in the United States that we can get their diagnosis codes, you know, with proper privacy and everything. But we can find out how many people are currently in that stage of the disease or whatever, so we can enroll them. Control groups for rare diseases, we have approved drugs where the control group was real world controls, not randomized controls, not contemporaneous controls, but evidence that we had from before that gave us a pretty good idea of that. And in fact, that's how a lot of cancer drugs are approved now. They are not randomized trials. Because we know the natural history of very advanced cancer. We know what it is for any given cancer, and so we can not have to do a randomized trial. So in the future, a lot of people are looking, for example, at using real-world evidence for repurposing of drugs. We've discovered some remarkable discoveries of drugs that were intended for something else, and then people were exposed to them, and their other condition, unrelated condition, got better, right? And so that's another example, but I think there are many, many ways in which in the future, as we learn to deal with this digital data and new data sources, we will get better and better at utilizing this. So that's something I would encourage you to explore. So it's imperative that we keep working together. The timelines are too long, the needs are too great, and the only way is really to come together, identify the gaps in your particular field, and figure out how to shorten those time frames, how to overcome those barriers, what they might be, and hopefully then tomorrow will be a better day for all of us as patients. Thank you very much.